Hey, and welcome back to Sessions with System and Soul. I'm Mackenzie Decker. I'm the co-founder and COO of System and Soul, and I'm here with my partner and our CEO, Benj Miller. Today we have a reflection session. And what that means is I'm going to ask Benj about what's going on behind closed doors in the session rooms that he's in with leadership teams. We do this because a lot of these things that we experience, that we hear about, that we work with teams through are things that are happening in businesses everywhere. And so there's a lot you could probably take away from this for your team. There's probably a lot of things that are going to feel familiar. And all that to say is that we are here with you. There's something for you to learn from this, but you're also just not alone. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I know Benj has a session in particular that I want to ask him about. Before we jump in, we want to thank Fist Bumps. Fist Bumps is the team that helps us produce this show. They help us get it out there and help you find us. They are fantastic. They're such an insanely good marketing and content resource for us. Highly recommend. So check out Fist Bumps, and they can be a great resource for you as you have a message to share out there in the world. But let's dive in. I want to ask Benj, so a few weeks ago, you had gotten together with a team for one of their quarterly sessions. And it stood out, like you don't always talk about every session that you have. And it stood out to me for a couple of reasons. And so if you can just describe for who's listening today, describe to them what it was about that session that was kind of unique.
The first thing is the contrast between the morning and the afternoon. The morning was super high energy, a lot of team and laughter. It was just really fun morning. And it was contrasted by a very, very heavy afternoon. And what had happened is we had gotten into some business issues and kind of why they were what they were. And it turned into an extremely, we talk about the enemy of conflict is artificial harmony. We see that with teams a lot, that our team's good, our team's good. Your team's good because they don't talk about anything. They don't talk about reality. They don't talk about what's really going on. They don't talk about the fact that they're not hitting their numbers or finishing their objectives or forced the room to be radically. Oh, I remember what it was. I did an afternoon check-in. So very different than when I do most of my sessions, but I had this little afternoon check-in because we were going to really work on a lot of the business opportunities. One of the questions in there that I asked them, they were all writing on a piece of paper. One of the questions was, what is it that we don't talk about? And as we went around the room and people were giving their answers, like 3 or 4 times, there was some version of, we don't talk about anything that requires radical candor. And I'm like, my brain is like on fire. I'm like, what is happening right now? And so I just had to call them out. Like, you realize that you all said, we don't talk about anything that involves radical candor instead of the things that you need to talk about that require radical candor. Like, y'all are guilty. Like every single one of you. You just called yourself out for what you're not doing. So we're going to do this again. I'm giving you 5 more minutes. What are the things we got to talk about that require radical candor? And they didn't like that. I mean, they didn't. We recently recorded an episode on here for a soul dive, Mackenzie. You and I, you did the frame, which love and fear and abundance and scarcity. And I think everybody got locked up and defensive in that moment, but there was no way out. I wasn't letting them out. So we just started going around the room and working people's lists. And it was very tense because people were saying the things that needed to be said. The room does have enough road miles to know that people genuinely care about each other and the organization. So I don't think there was like anybody that felt like they were out for their own. But I think they were afraid of saying the things, afraid of hurting other people, afraid of voicing how they felt about certain things because it would disrupt people. There were a few times in that you could see people get like physically shaken. And, I'm as a facilitator, I'm kind of the last resort in the room. I let the room unfold naturally. And there was a very empathetic, high EQ leader in the room who actually had us pause a few times. Like, hey, you're reacting. Let's all just pause and take a few deep breaths. And and then re-engage, right? Not from that triggered space. But I think it was super healthy, and I think they actually need a few more of those. Like, hopefully that's like the first time that they're working this muscle, and they realize that they are all okay and they all still like each other and they can do more of it. But there were tears in there, and sometimes it's tears of saying like, I actually need you. Like, I need this strength from you. Don't hold back. So it's not all negative stuff. The stuff that we fear is all negative, and sometimes it's not. But there was a mix. So there was tears. There were people, you know, very defensive because they know that they were letting their team down in certain areas in front of a very large leadership team. It's a big room. So yeah, it was a really, really heavy afternoon.
Sounds like it. I don't think you told me how that all kicked off and sort of the progression of, like, saying, "Oh, we need to have radical candor," and then you're like, "Hold on. What are we really talking about?"
Yeah. I didn't know. I didn't know. Like, there's all these pent up non-radical candor things on their list. Here's the other thing that really, really stood out to me as I'm remembering this day is that in two different occasions, but one articulated it perfectly, talked about how they have to hold themselves back, basically to play down to the level of everybody else in the room. They didn't say it like that, but I'm reading between the lines, right? Like, this person has more capacity, more energy, more drive than they're bringing to the business because they don't want to disrupt the people or the team with that energy. And it was the most tangible, articulate version of, Stephen Covey wrote a book called The Speed of Trust, which articulates like, if I can, she just beautifully summed it up. Like, I, I am only going at the speed that this room will allow, which is not the speed of my full capacity. And I was like, that broke my heart a little bit because she's super high capacity. I'm like, well, man, what would happen if we unlocked her full capacity in this organization? And if she's doing it, how many other people in the room are doing it as well? And so right there, multiply that across the top leaders in the organization. Everything we do at the top leadership level of an organization spills into the whole organization. So, like, how much economic capacity in that organization is pent up?
Yeah.
Uh, because there's this lack of candor.
Well, that's what's at risk, right? Like, there is tangible financial growth risk without that. Tell me, okay, there's a lot to this, like a ton. But I think I wanna say, I think the reason that I wanted to talk to you about this on this episode is because I think what you described is, I mean, it's real with any team. Like, any team is gonna have, every team has dynamics. Sometimes those dynamics are good, sometimes they're bad. In this case, is a very healthy team dynamic that's able to do something that requires a high degree of trust and high level functioning. I'm wondering if you can answer the question of, like, for any one person who's like, we need that. Like, I wish that we had that for our team. How could they get there? And how could they get there? How could they have conversations that are more, that look more like that help the team really use the trust that they've built to leverage it and get to a new place? How could they do that, and what do you think prevents that? Like, what's the thing that people do wrong when they try to create conversations like that?
You just asked a lot of questions. There's the first thing that comes to mind is there are some tools that can help guide into these conversations, like 5 dysfunctions of a team, a radical candor exercise. There's some things that unlock the topic, but it's like Daniel Coyle in Culture Code says, like, vulnerability requires somebody to step out and go first and risk the lack of safety. Typically, this is one of those areas where the leader in the room, the person with the most influence, sets the tone.
Yeah.
So they can do that either by creating a lot of safety or being first with the vulnerability. If as a leader you walk into a room where you've never created the safety for vulnerability and say, okay, this is a safe room, we're all going to be vulnerable now. Nobody believes that, right? Like,
Right.
there's a character thing here. There's some proven experience of, like, how does that leader react when these conversations happen? That is like, if you had to weight the room, no matter how many people are in the room, there's like the weight of that number, the most influential leader and the rest of the room are probably balanced. So the weight of that leader in the room to set that tone of how they're going to react in those conversations or how they're going to facilitate that conversation is kind of everything. So sometimes people, I have these conversations, they're like, we need to get in there and just have this conversation. I'm like, well, it's probably not going to go well. You
Yeah.
probably need a couple baby steps to prove to people that you can have that conversation. Those conversations go well, that they're well received, that it's like, I have this mentality that like my problem is our problem, because if I have this problem in the business, then it's all of our problem because it's holding up the business, right? But does the room treat the problem like that, or is it just my problem? And sometimes the problem is literally my problem. You and I deal with this all the time. There's one thing that you constantly want me to do, and I constantly procrastinate and avoid, and it is literally just my problem. But it's an organizational problem at the same time. So we've got to have that. It's not holding me accountable, and it's not ignoring it, and it's not also like beating me with a baseball bat, right? So like how do you navigate through those conversations over time? It's a really hard question to ask. Like, how do you go do these? Sometimes it's better to start in more of a one-on-one environment. The variables go down exponentially, right? So if you
Even
can prove that you can have these conversations one-on-one, and then that leader can go, hey, I know this is a little scary, but I think we actually need to have this conversation as a team. I've got this for a session coming up in 2 weeks where I've got two different leaders on the team emailing me what they think that we should do and how the day should go, and they're completely opposite. And I'm like, hey, this is why we need to decide this as a team. He's like, hey, let's get on the phone and talk this through. I'm like, no, we need to talk it through when we're in the room with the whole team. And that's part of why safety is broken down, is because of these side conversations trying to decide what the room needs instead of having that conversation as the room.
Yeah. There's a couple of things you said that you totally answered my question, I think. One, where it goes wrong or off the rails, I think, is not realizing that if you are the leader, the CEO, the owner, the founder, that you kind of like you have to be prepared to go first, whether that's in vulnerability or in creating safety. You also said that they really have to recognize that their weight in the room is probably equivalent to the collective of everybody else. They have to really realize the weight that they carry. You said trust may need to be built. Trust needs to be built ahead of time, and it should likely be built one to one before we go and try to have a trusting conversation as a whole team. Um, man.
I'll give you one more thing that, like, I think, like, as I'm observing rooms, one of the things that I'm ultra aware of if somebody's ultra defensive,
Mhm.
um, or even defensive. Like, we're all levels of defensive on different things, and we have hot topics and buttons to push. But if we, I would say the number one trait that you can work on as a leader to build this is when that information comes in and that instinct is to be defensive, everything in your body, you've got to pause, breathe, and figure out how to act in a non-defensive way. You have to self-regulate your defensive reaction. It's the difference between like react and respond. Like, stop reacting, take that breath and respond. And no matter what you do, figure out how to do it in a non-defensive way. The best thing you could do is ask that next inquisitive question to make sure, like, the minute you come out with something, me with something, and I act defensive, we're shut down. Like,
Yeah.
it's going into problem, who's the problem, blame, etc. If you come at me with a problem and I go, take that breath, that's really interesting. Why do you think that's happening? Just in that reaction, I've now given you permission to bring the thing the next time, to tell me more. I'm hearing you. You're safe to talk about it. Like, all of that happens in that first 5-10 seconds of how we respond as a leader. And you can fake that. Like, there's a lot of leadership that you have to learn over a long period of time, but you can fake that until it becomes real. Like it's just I will not react. I will not, no matter what it is, I will not be defensive. Maybe it's about me. It's like, you're really good at that. If you were me, how would give me some advice on how I could start to be more like you in that regard, right? Like whatever it needs to be, that's the number one thing. And if you start showing up like that over and over, one on one and with your team, I think it really starts to unlock a lot of doors. The other thing I talk about a lot is that there's no such thing as team trust.
Yeah.
It's all one on one. And so that's where the complexity in a room of senior leaders show up, because it's not only one to one, but it's two directional one to one, right? So for every person in there, you start to get an exponential, like bi-directional number of pieces of trust that can break down. It's part of why I like small leadership teams. Because you can get to a super high level of trust a lot faster. It takes a lot to have a really large team and a really high level of trust.
Yeah. It sounds like that's the full-time job. Honestly, like you could spend all of your time just working on building trust with the people on your team. It should probably be it should like literally be written in the job description, like because it's so imperative. And there's one, as you were talking, it made me think of probably something I picked up in counseling, but there's a 5-to-1 ratio for positive and negative interactions with any one person. So I say it's a full-time job because you gotta be thinking about, like, we need to have 5 positive interactions, meaning they go well, or that person feels cared for, that person feels seen, known, heard, whatever, before we can have the one negative interaction where it's like, "Hey, I really need to give you this feedback. This is not going well. We're not performing. We're not hitting the bar. We're not above the bar." Like, that one doesn't get received well at all if the 5 haven't happened. Because that person doesn't know, like, they don't know that you're for them and with them. So, it's such an important thing, but it's also such a time-consuming, necessary thing. Oh, wait. Benj, let me ask you one more thing about this particular team, because I know that this is a team that you've worked with them for years, right?
Yeah.
So can you describe, like, over the last several years, so you saw this play out a few weeks ago. What did it look like 2, 3, 4 years ago, and what do you think changed for that team so that they could be where they are now and kind of leaning into that hard stuff and those hard conversations?
Yeah. Well, the team's very different than it was. So there was a process of leveling up the leadership in the team, getting the right people in the room. And now we've got a room full of people that are learning to lead at this new level that they've never led at before. And so, especially in a large organization, you kind of come in and you fill a seat, and you're doing everything you can to fill the seat right the way that you think you're supposed to, which is not leading, right? It's like, fitting in and filling a seat is not leading. And so it's really just it's almost a permissioning that had to happen to get not everybody, some of the people in the room, to think about, what does it look like to actually lead at this level? What are the things that I should be initiating with this room instead of responding to? So it is a process. One of the things that we talk about all the time is progress over perfection. And my speed of change is not my client's speed of change or desire. And I've got all kinds of the spectrum of, like, a client that will change as fast as we can get there, and one that's like wants to think about everything for 6 months before we implement, right? Like, so it's really like, you've got to, like, I can't control that. I learned really early on that, and I still make this mistake all the time, but I can't want something more for somebody than they want it for themselves. And so I just have to be available to help them with the next step, the step that they're ready to take right now. And so there's part of me that could be like, wow, I've had this client for years, and what a failure on my part that they can't have radical candor, like that. But I don't, because it was like that, whatever took place that worked its way up to that session for the perfect time that session was, into the future. I couldn't have forced that day,
Right.
6 months ago.
That's I mean, you're speaking about that from a facilitator coach point of view, but I think that's also good advice for leaders of people. We can't force someone into a place of change, but we can open the door. And I think that starts with, being trustworthy, being vulnerable, demonstrating that kind of leadership that builds relationships, and then letting them decide, what pace that they're able to make, the pace that they're able to, meet us there and kind of build up to that same kind of trust.
Yeah. Yep.
This has been awesome, and I appreciate everything that you shared. I know it's been valuable for me as I lead my team and think about our ability to have those hard conversations. I'm also challenged by it. There's a lot of ways that I think I could show up better that, going first, that would allow our team to unlock more of the important things that we need to continue to refine. Thanks, Benj. And thanks again to Fist Bumps for supporting us and helping us create this and get it out there in the world. We will see you next week for another episode